surprise attack with a nuclear strike, which Iran was preparing for, would have been terminal. Israel could not and would not wait for that moment to arrive.
Of course, that is open to debate, whether that was in fact going to happen or not. That is what Israel is claiming. There are critics now who are condemning what Israel has done. We'll see how that all plays out. The international community is urging, such as it is, de-escalation.
The Secretary General asks both sides to show maximum restraint, avoiding at all costs a descent into deeper conflict, a situation that the region can hardly afford.
This has got to be very humiliating for the regime in Iran, because not only was Israel able to strike with impunity with hundreds of strikes, but also they had operatives on the ground in Iran, it appears, who carried out assassinations, killing Iran's top general, some of their top nuclear scientists as well. Let's bring in Christian Leuprecht, who's standing by to join me with his take. He's a military analyst. He's with the Macdonald-Laurier Institute and the Center for North American Prosperity and Security. Christian, always good to have you with us here. The day after, and it's ongoing, by the way, as you know, but your read on what we're seeing, the scope, the scale, what Israel has done.
Yeah, I think this was very calibrated, because you see Israel going after nuclear facilities and military installations and military and nuclear leadership in terms of its decapitation strategy, but it has not touched the political leadership, and it does not appear to have touched the religious leadership. And so I think this is also calibrated to leave an opening for Iran to continue negotiations and perhaps to force Iran into making concessions rather than lose more face. And this, of course, is the Middle East, so it is all about saving face for Iran at this point.
When you hear the Israeli ambassador, Christian, say the strikes were preemptive based on intelligence about a possible Iranian, maybe nuclear strike on Israel, thoughts on that?
Well, we had UN confirmation that Iran had significantly accelerated its nuclear program in recent months and was clearly in violation of UN expectations and the standards the UN had set for Iran. And so that gave Israel also legitimacy, very narrow legitimacy under international law to take a preemptive strike. And of course, Israel has said for 2 decades that Iran accomplishing the development of nuclear weapons would pose an existential threat to Israel, something that Israel would never be able to allow. And so Israel, I think, exploited sort of the opportunity that it had here.
We're going to show some of the Iranians who were killed in the attacks or the assassinations on the ground. That does include the top general who was in charge of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard, IRGC. What does his death mean?
So there's a number of very senior military leaders that Israel targeted, and clearly it knew the whereabouts of those leaders and they had the ability to target them. So if I was a senior leader in the IRGC, in the Iranian military, or in the Iranian nuclear program, I'd certainly be a little worried about my safety. This is, I think, is also meant to impede the ability of Iran to respond, because if you take out the senior military leadership, then that'll make it more difficult for Iran to coordinate. But I think the IRGC also effectively owns the nuclear program. So this was primarily, I think, intended to demonstrate that Israel's main objective is to stop Iran from acquiring a nuclear weapon, not to engage in an all-out conflict and confrontation with Iran per se.
They have said that the Iranian nuclear program in the wrong hands is an existential threat to the existence, really, of Israel. Are you surprised they did this?
Well, I'm not. Look, Israel is about the size of New Jersey. One hit with a single nuclear weapon would risk taking out the entire country and the 10 million people who live there. And so, from a North American perspective, where we live on a big continent, the situation looks very different than if you're surrounded by hostile countries and one of them is looking to acquire nuclear weapons and has a decades-long track record of effectively calling for the elimination of your country. You can see how the Israeli leadership would not want to take a risk. But I think, look, there's also political calculus that I think Prime Minister Netanyahu is trying to keep the conflict in the region going. And he clearly didn't want to go down in history as the leader under whose leadership we saw the largest loss of Jewish life since the Holocaust. He wanted to go down in history as the person who neutralized Hamas, decapitated Hezbollah, and effectively convinced Iran to scale down its nuclear nuclear program. And so there is, I think, some tag teaming between the U.S. and Israel, not in direct coordination, but I think they're serving one another's purpose.
Final question is on the United States. So let me get your take on what you think the calculus is in Washington here. There was supposedly and are set to be ongoing discussions between Washington and Tehran about Iran's nuclear program. What does this attack, an ongoing attack, mean for any sort of talks to try and solve that?
Yeah, look, it's a great question because, of course, it looked like the agreement that was on the table for the Trump administration in Iran looked suspiciously similar to the JCPOA that the Trump administration tore up in 2018. And so for Trump to claim victory, basically with the same agreement he tore up, wasn't going to look very good on Trump. And at the same time, that agreement was always going to be unacceptable to Israel, which is why I think Prime Minister Netanyahu decided to strike when he did. And this, of course, plays into the hands of the Trump administration because now it means the political leadership in Iran has the opportunity to signal to the Trump administration that it may be prepared to make the sort of concessions that it has been unwilling to make for the past 20 years in order both to save face and perhaps this could be existential for the regime if people start going on the streets.
Christian, always good to have you and get your insights and knowledge on this. Thanks so much.
Always a pleasure, Todd. Thank you.